welcome to you from the mind of Christine McConnell. We are finally to the last chapter of this plaster project, and I am so happy because all of the scary unknown stuff is behind me, and now it's just fun stuff. So what I want to do is add some embellishments to what I've already created, and the very first step I'm going to do to take things in that direction is to go around the house and photograph any little bits that give me some inspiration. So I'm very lucky in that this house has a lot of really beautiful ornate embellishments, and I'm going to be able to use those as kind of like an inspiration and a jumping off point in creating something that's going to look really beautiful on this cornice. Before beginning any big project, it's really a great idea to have someone on hand to inspect the tools that you're going to be using, and luckily Professor Poof is very much up for that task. To ensure that my design isn't going to be either too big or too small for the space I want to install it, I'm using the cutout that I used to make the actual cornice medallion as kind of just a template so that I can create something that's going to fit nice and snug in that space. Symmetry is so important when you are tackling a decorative sort of looking element, and so my favorite go-to technique for this is to just draw half of it on trace paper, fold that in half, and then that way when you fold that over, you can just trace it out and it is identical on both sides. To create a copy that I can actually build my Sculpey on top of, I'm just tracing this out on another piece of trace paper. And this way, if something were to happen to that, I have this master file that I haven't ruined off to the side. There's this unique and unusual design that I find all over this house, and it's kind of a mix between a cross and a fleur-de-lis. And so I love how unique and beautiful it is, and so I definitely want to see if I can't incorporate this as well. I wanted to create something kind of completely original and unique here at the end of these half circles on either end. And so the way I'm doing this is I'm just tracing out what that curvature is, finding its center, and then from there I'm just going to kind of experiment a little bit until I just come across something that I'm happy with. The last thing I need to sketch out is these kind of gradiating sizes of kind of a little bit of a fleur-de-lis. And so the way I'm doing this is I drew out an initial shape, and then I'm putting trace paper over that, and then just going a little bit bigger on every single pass. And this way I know that every one of these is going to be in line and in step with the one just behind it. And it's a perfect way to create sort of just a graduated size. Now that I have my sketches ready to go, I can start sculpting these shapes into three-dimensional pieces. My friend Matt Pastore from the Syracuse Antiques Exchange once brought me over this pasta roller sort of thing, and he gave it to me to use to actually like make pasta. But I found it's amazingly great for rolling out polymer clay because instead of like hurting your hands grinding it and getting it sort of malleable, it does the job for you so quickly. Last year, I discovered the podcast My Favorite Murder, and I actually listened to the entire show over a period of maybe a year. And once I was done, I didn't know what to do with myself because it had just become such a fun thing to sort of disappear into. But luckily, I have the memory of a drunk hamster, and so I was actually able to start the whole series again, and it turns out I hardly remember any of those stories, so it's kind of like listening to it all over again for the first time. Once you're happy with how your sculpt is looking, to smooth it out to a nice even finish, you can just take some rubbing alcohol and a brush, and it will kind of melt that top layer a little bit. And now it's going to go into the oven to bake for just about 15 minutes. This next piece is going to take me a second because it's pretty complicated and I'm going to have to sort of noodle around with this clay for a little while until I come across something that I'm happy with. While I work on this, let me share two amazing audiobooks I started listening to throughout the process of working on this entire thing. And the first one is called Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky. And it's an amazing sci-fi book. And there's a sequel that's also incredible. And I think there's even a third one I haven't listened to yet. And the second book is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, because I don't know why I never listened to it. I've never read a Jane Austen book. And it turns out the audiobook is just unbelievable. So I know that's going to come as a shock that it turns out Jane Austen is a really good author, but I did not anticipate the book being so incredible. So if you have not read that or listened to it, please stop everything you're doing. It will make you so happy. I think this is done, and so now it's just time to pop it into the oven. So I don't know if you can tell or not, but that didn't go as planned. I was running around the house, and basically what had happened was it had to go in the oven. I wasn't thinking, and I set it to 425 instead of 225. And it took 2 days to sculpt that thing and 7 minutes to destroy it. The only thing I will say that's good about this is I will never do that again. It is now seared into my brain for life. And, I sat around, I was sad for about 20 minutes, and then I just got up, went back upstairs, and sculpted another one. Thankfully, it didn't take nearly as long because I kind of wasn't just figuring it all out for the first time. And somehow I was actually happier with the second one. With the big ones out of the way, now I can move on to these smaller little detailed pieces. These little kind of, I don't even know what you'd call them, little rosebud looking things, they took a long time to fiddle with until I sort of found a shape that I really felt like was working and was kind of unique. The look and shape I was going for with these was to essentially kind of just create a baby version of that first shape that I sculpted initially. And it took kind of a lot of tweaking and fiddling, but ultimately I did end up with something that I was really happy with. The last thing I'm going to sculpt is that unusual kind of cross-like shape that I keep finding around the house. And it's kind of a fun challenge just because I am able to add a lot of dimension by making it something obviously three-dimensional. And so it just took a little bit of fiddling, and very quickly it just started looking really beautiful. I am super jazzed with how all of these turned out. And now the next step is to start making the molds. If you enjoyed craft time in elementary school, then you are going to love this step of the process, because I personally did, and I just think it is such a fun way to kind of just reuse trash around your house to kind of just make like a little home for these little things to sit in and then for you to pour that molding fluid into. To stop my pieces from shifting or floating away into the silicone molding, I'm using just a tiny little drop of polymer clay and fusing them to the bottom of the tray. That way they don't budge. The two-part silicone mold making kit I'm using here is the Smooth On brand. You can get it on Amazon. And the other brand that I love just as much, maybe even more, is the one that you can just pick up from Michael's, and it's in a red box. To avoid creating any unwanted like gaps or air bubbles, I'm just using a brush to kind of really work this mixture into all of the nooks and crannies. Your working time with the silicone molding depends on the brand that you get and the setting that you purchase. So they come in a bunch of different setting times. This one is going to set in about 30 minutes. And so you have that amount of time to mix the two parts together and then just start pouring them over your mold. Getting unwanted gaps or air bubbles really is most of a threat when you're dealing with small little tiny pieces. So if you are doing something like what I'm doing right here, you definitely want to take your time and do it pretty slowly. For this larger piece, I'm going to fuse these little balls and any of those little decorative elements pretty close to it as I start building the casing. And then because this is obviously such a delicate piece, you don't want a mold that's too big, otherwise it's most likely to break things as you're trying to release them. So I'm getting all of my cardboard pieces as tight as I possibly can. Once the mold is set and it's time to start releasing your pieces, you may need to take a blade and just finally go around and get anything that kind of bled underneath your mold. Releasing the larger one is pretty scary just because obviously you don't want it to actually break your initial mold. And so definitely I had to take a lot of time with this, but I was very careful. And ultimately I did need to cut away some of the sides of the silicone just to make sure it was as flexible as possible. To release the spheres, all you need to do is cut kind of a cross shape and then just flex it to release them. And this is the same way that you'll be removing your duplicates that you start pouring plaster into. Thankfully, that went really smoothly, and now I can start pouring plaster into these molds. For smaller pieces like this, you definitely want to create a pretty liquidy mixture with your plaster, so quite a bit of water. And this is just going to give you the ability to really kind of make sure it pours into all of those tight spaces. Something that is so much fun about working with plaster of Paris is how quickly it sets. So you really don't have to wait too long before you start releasing things from their molds. This is just about my favorite part of the whole process because you just start seeing what these duplicates look like, and in this case, they just turned out perfect. This one, on the other hand, was a whole lot more tricky because the first few broke here at those delicate little edges. And so what I found I needed to do was to make a lot of cuts along the sides of the silicone so that it would just kind of relax and open up. And so you want to open it basically at the edges first and work your way towards the center. Once you've cast everything, you do kind of need to go around each and every piece with some sort of a file or sanding paper just to perfect anything that might just be jutting out or looking a little bit off. These sanding sticks you can pick up online are incredible because I think I bought a pack of them a few years ago and I've hardly made a dent. So you can just kind of reuse them over and over again, and they just seem to keep going forever. So thankfully, plaster sands really easily, and this whole process was so relaxing. I was also listening to a great audiobook, and it just made this particular day maybe my favorite out of the whole project. And so once I was done with that, I needed to create some templates so I could kind of figure out where I was going to be adhering these pieces. In order to essentially have a map to work around, I had to tape my initial template all back together just so that it was complete again. My plan here is to lay some sheets of paper down underneath my template. That way I kind of know exactly where these pieces need to sit. And then I can set them in place and trace around them with a Sharpie. And once that's done, I can just cut them out, put them up on the ceiling, and trace out that outline. I don't know exactly what caused this turning point, but several months ago, Arthur Buttons just decided that he just loves me more than anything in the world. And so now he just is my little furry shadow that everywhere I walk, I can just hear his little nails clacking very close behind me. Figuring out the best placement for these smaller little accents was a little bit tricky just because they needed to be spaced exactly the same distance from one another. And then I created a line outside of the border that the center of each one of the accents needed to basically kind of ride along. Once I was happy with their placements, I just had to trace around each one and then cut that all out. Little Buttons kept stepping on everything, so we tried separating him, and then he just looked so sad. We just we just couldn't do that. One of the last templates I need to create is for the cross accent. Now that I know where everything is going to go, I just need to mark these placements on the ceiling. I wish I could pretend that looking up and working on a ceiling isn't that terrible, but the truth is it's just murder and it's not very fun. But ultimately, I think what this is going to end up looking like is worth all of that pain. I'm using a laser to find the exact center, and from here I'll be able to place that kind of really cool accent medallion right in the middle. Two of these accents needed that sort of point cut off, so I'm just using a blade, getting rid of that, and I'm just going to gently sand that flat. I will also be screwing in the larger pieces to the ceiling directly, so I do need to pre-drill them. In order to make sure that my little pieces really grab onto the ceiling, I'm using a little pointed spike and gouging in these little sort of divots, and this is going to help these really kind of fuse to the ceiling. Because everything is outlined on the ceiling, there's no guesswork here, and it just made this part so much fun. Cleaning up any of the excess plaster as soon as you possibly can is pretty critical because it does set very fast. So I just used a tool to kind of scrape away the bigger sections and then just a wet rag to clean everything up. This larger piece was a little tiny bit scary just because it was so delicate, but I just was very careful to put a thin coat of the plaster on the backside, making sure I went all the way to the edges and then just fused it into place. Something great that happens with the plaster when you push it up into the ceiling is it instantly creates a suction. So you really kind of don't need to hold it and it sets within maybe just a couple of seconds. So you do want to be a little bit careful, and when you put it up on the ceiling, make sure it is exactly where it is supposed to sit. One of the very last things I need to do is to use a drill and a screw and very gently push this into place. And you don't want to go too far and actually create much tension between the plaster. This is just kind of like a fail safe that you're creating. Then to mask the appearance of that screw, I'm piping in a little tiny bit of plaster and then wedging in those pearls I created. And here's what it looks like all painted. On Monday, I'll be posting an episode that features what the room looks like painted, as well as the new light fixture. And it is all done, and I just think it's maybe one of my most favorite projects ever, and I think that has to do with the fact that it was lost and forgotten for so long. And the fact that I was able to bring it back just kind of makes me feel like I've really left my stamp on this house. In addition to that, these molds aren't going anywhere, so I could honestly take them anywhere else, use them for so many other things. If you are in the second tier and up, we are going to be posting the templates for all of these, so a lot of the stuff you could create. We also have so much left to do in this room. In addition to that, the roof is getting tackled, so there's a bunch of fun stuff on the horizon. So until then, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you again very soon.